Chapter 6. Nothing to Fear. There was an awkwardness in the relations of Reddy and the king. They stayed together much as before, but with a difference. For now Reddy's interest in the hounds came between them. Each time Johnny let the three loose to hunt, Reddy would join them as soon as he heard their baying, and sometimes he would run with them all day, and sleep most of the night instead of hunting with the wolf. Every day, too, he became more accustomed to hearing and seeing Johnny, until the time came when he actually walked around the cabin with the hounds. Warily, it was true, but without running when Johnny came to put out the black and tans into their kennel. One night he slept near the cabin, and in the morning he ate the breakfast which Johnny left for him at a little distance down the trail. In another week he let Johnny touch him. This was a big moment for the ranger. The four hounds had been playing and had thrown themselves down for a few minutes of rest. Johnny was sitting on a flat stone not far away, cleaning the frying pan, when suddenly the red hound rose to his feet and looked into the valley. He'd heard an animal crashing through the brush below. The black and tans came forward inquisitively to find out what had held his attention, and Johnny, seeing that for the moment all four were so occupied with this that they'd forgotten everything else, moved to them and gently placed his hand on Reddy's shoulder. For several seconds he held it there. Then Reddy looked around and shrank away, more in surprise than fear, but Johnny knew that he had gained something. Later, Reddy gingerly accepted little pieces of ham held out to him, and from that time changed very much in his attitude toward Johnny. After a few days he seemed anxious to be on the same footing as the other pups, and to be treated in a friendly way. Partly it was kind of jealousy, and partly a desire to be affectionate with man, the superior being. The heritage of the dog was asserting itself. Before long he'd become so attached to the ranger that few outsiders would have guessed that he was by training as wild as a wolf. To Johnny, who recognized his good qualities, it was almost like a dream come true. There came a night, however, when he went on the big hunt with the king, 10 miles or more from the Little Sheep Creek Valley. The two scaled a mountain known as Eagle Peak, and fought a mountain goat on the edge of the precipice. It was quite like old times. Reddy held the billy at bay while the wolf circled around, and came on him from behind where the shelf of rock was more than a foot wide. Anything might have happened, but when the billy charged Reddy and almost hurled him into space with his spiked horns, the king dashed forward, and in the melee it was the big goat that went hurling 1,000 feet below into the canyon. The two looked at him land in the brushes far below, and then, somewhat sobered by the danger, gingerly edged along the shelf to safer ground, and ran down the mountain to find the carcass, and eat as they'd always eaten until there was no room for more. That was an exciting night, for barely had they filled themselves, except the last bite or two, when a grizzly stepped out of the brushes and undertook to drive them from their kill. This was a medium-sized bear, and they'd often seen him with his own hunting, but they'd never interfered. Generally, he'd been digging marmots and gophers out of their burrows when the two came upon him, and he'd contemptuously glanced at them and not even stopped his work. But now his hair stood up on his shoulders, and he fairly roared as he charged. Taken by surprise, the two retreated, and let the bully take possession of the carcass. But when he scornfully turned his back, the injustice of the thing bored on Reddy's temper, and in a sudden surge of fury he ran up and bit the bear's right hind leg quick and hard. That was all King needed to arouse him too. When the raging grizzly swung around at Reddy, he attacked from the other side and slashed the bear's furry rump. With two such animals running in and out to nip and cut and dodge away, the bear was so hot and bothered that he charged around in circles, snapping recklessly and catching neither of his enemies. Had the hound and the wolf been less crammed with food, they might have given the bear a really rough time, but when he turned tail and humped himself toward safer country, they were too much out of breath to care to follow. They threw themselves on the ground to pant and cool off, while settling their full stomachs once more. But the excitement had not ended, for next came a bigger grizzly, followed by 3 cubs. This was more than they wanted just then, so when the mother woofed her youngsters up a tree, clearing the field for battle, they left the goat to her. As they trotted away, they saw her broad brown back over the white of the goatskin, and part way up a spruce, the 3 bright-eyed, eager little brown cubs looking down at it all as they hugged the trunk with sharp claws dug into the bark. Later their claws would grow too long to be blunted by rough use among the rocks to be useful for climbing. But now the cubs could climb like cats and easily keep out of danger when their mother faced a fight. Up on a pile of boulders where they could see in every direction, the hound and the wolf rested again. There was dirt in their coats, which had to be licked out, but after that they just felt happy about everything and began to play and roll about. The rocks were hard, so they trotted to an open glade among the spruce thickets and rolled and played some more. Reddy could try all kinds of fighting holds and test his strength in various ways against the powerful and larger adversary, who knew much more about these things and could defend himself. Their play was always like this, a kind of mock battle, with the wolf only letting out enough of his great strength to puzzle Reddy and give him hard practice that he needed. It ended by the king shaking himself free and bolting away, with Reddy in hot pursuit, only to be bowled over by the wolf's sudden turn, and a quick thrust at the shoulder. Reddy could never learn to defend himself against that. They retired for the day in a grove near a little canyon where a stream helped keep the air cool. Above them was the rock country, far below, a broad valley that seemed like an endless mass of treetops. They could test the air with their noses and catch the scent of caribou, mountain sheep, marmots, and rock ptarmigan. This was real game country, such as they loved. When dawn broke, a coyote began to yap and howl. As the sun appeared, the marmot shuffled from one burrow to another, whistling occasionally. Almost beside Reddy, a tiny creature, a pika, or rock rabbit scarcely larger than a rat, sat on a boulder and looked at him with wide eyes. Under the edge of the boulder, which served as a roof, was a pile of grass and weeds, the pika's haystack, which he'd gathered with infinite patience for food in bad weather. A stone rolled down a rock slide, and then another. Reddy looked up quickly, but saw only a line of brown animals with great curling horns, a band of rams traveling single file along the side of the mountain. In another section of the mountains could be ewes and lambs at this time of the year. Circling calmly overhead were 2 golden eagles. Everything was as it should be, and Reddy yawned and rolled over on his side. Before evening, rain began to fall, the gentle kind that sank into the ground and made the vegetation green and luscious. At once the grazing animals responded and went forth to fill themselves, while the carnivorous kinds foresaw good hunting and followed them. Reddy and the king walked out on a rock that overlooked the big valley and watched some of this. A cow moose with twin calves was nipping at a low hardwood branch not far below them. Her brown body matched the trunks of the trees so perfectly that she was almost invisible until she moved about. The calves, little more than 1/3 her size, stayed close for protection and fed on whatever kind of leaves and twigs that she ate. Where the soapberry bushes were plentiful and full of red fruit, the porcupine was stripping them methodically by standing on his hind legs and pulling all that he could reach toward him. Still further below appeared a black bear, with the same berry-gathering idea. A band of 5 caribou wandered along one of the game trails, and behind them stalked a gray lynx, not quite sure whether he should risk the danger from their hooves and attack the smallest calf, or turn his attention to snowshoe hares. White specks on the side of the far peak denoted goats. Yes, it was a game country, one of the finest in the whole mountain region. The black wolf's muscles quivered slightly at the sight of the caribou, but he was not hungry, and he never killed just for the fun of it. probably he would not have moved from the rock had he not scented wolves, newcomers that he did not recognize. At once he and Reddy left the rock and circled through the brush to reconnoiter, for it was well to make sure that the wolves were not hostile. Presently they saw 2 old greys, followed by 4 well-grown, leggy youngsters. At the same moment, these became aware of the king and Reddy. The big male came forward stiffly and guardedly to strut around the king, after which the others advanced and sniffed at Reddy with a kind of curiosity that wolves always showed towards him. He bore it all in utmost good humor, though with every faculty alert. When all formalities were over, they sat and lolled about, waiting for one of the leaders to start to hunt for food. Eventually it was the mother wolf who restlessly took the initiative, followed one by one of her band until all vanished into the deep shadows, leaving the king and Reddy again alone. Soon a far-away howl in the valley told them that the hunt was on. Reddy and the king loped out of the brushes to the vantage point among the rocks and watched for signs of progress of the chase. The rain had stopped, but the moisture hung like fog in the still air, and everything was dripping wet. More howls, and then an immense bull moose came trotting along the slope and vanished in the timber. Not long afterwards, a loud clamor arose in the valley. The young wolves had sighted their prey, and they were too excited to keep silent. Reddy and the king did not move, but they were deeply interested now. The clamor moved down the valley and then centered at one spot. It rose to an even higher pitch. The whole band appeared to be baying all together. After a few minutes of this, Reddy could not hold back any longer and ran down the slope toward the noise. He plunged into the forest and suddenly came to a little glade at the further edge of which was a strange scene. In a pool of muddy water made by an alkali spring stood not a moose, but a bull caribou surrounded by the wolves. The mud and water reached to his knees, but he was too deep for his pursuers, who ran around it rather than risk coming in reach of the bull's sharp hooves where they could not dodge. The caribou's magnificent antlers were still covered with velvet, too soft and sensitive for defense, but he swung them about in furious threats. His nostrils were wide and his eyes were glaring. The clamor died down when Reddy appeared, the wolves being undecided as to what his coming might mean. The high-strung nerves of the big gray male seemed to give way at this intrusion, and without the least warning he turned on the hound and slashed at his throat. Reddy leapt to one side and then was engulfed in a mass attack by the other wolves, who were quick to follow their leader. The caribou seemed forgotten, as they joined joyously in this new fight and swarmed all over the hound, who went down under the first big rush and was battling on his back like a cat. The new noise reached King, who listened to it without understanding its significance. However, he loped down the mountain to investigate, and when he reached the glade, he needed just one look. He came into the seething mass of lean gray bodies like a thunderbolt and killed the first wolf he hit as if his neck had been a matchstick. In the next instant, he'd hurled the biggest beast out of his way and was standing over Reddy, every hair on his great back bristling, his long, jagged rows of teeth bared, and a deep furrow almost hiding his eyes as his rage fairly boiled over, and growls such as those that the wolves had never heard rumbled from his chest and drowned out their shrill clamor. Reddy got to his feet as the wolves hesitated and slunk back. He was bloody and mauled, but he had only one thought, and that was to settle the score with the big gray male. Suddenly he charged, and only the nimblest dodging saved the gray from going down. The two were almost the same in weight and height, and made a perfect picture of well-matched ferocity as they circled each other. Feinted rushes, parried with their feet, clashed teeth against teeth, rose on hind legs to spar or leapt this way or that with deadly slashing at shoulder and leg. The hound was waiting for an opening to get his favorite hold on the neck, just back of the wolf's terrible jaws. He tried again and again, and each time was met by slashing teeth. And then he tried the black wolf's trick of offering his shoulder and whirling when his enemy struck, so that teeth passed harmlessly over his rump and he could slash at the other's hind legs. But Reddy did not slash. Instead, he gripped with all the strength of his jaws, and putting his weight into the lift, he threw the wolf to the ground and leapt on top of him. He had the great kicking, snarling beast down and fighting for his life. Not now was the wolf thinking of killing the hound. He was just trying to get away, to protect his throat, to keep his legs from being smashed. And Reddy stood there waiting his chance. If ever a dog looked terrible, it was Reddy in those fierce moments. But he did not strike. Some strange force in his nature held him back. Now that his enemy was down, his rage was cooled, and he let the wolf roll free and dash for the woods. For a time he stood there, legs apart, while he regained his breath. The wolf pack had vanished, with the exception of the one that lay sprawled in the grass, a gray splotch against the green. The caribou still stood in the water, head low as he watched. The king was lying down, licking a cut on a front leg. Presently the caribou raised his head and took an experimental step toward the bank. Neither Reddy nor the black wolf took any special notice, so he made a leap and then another, and in a few moments was among the bushes. There he stood to look back curiously at the two who did not want to kill him. At length he shook his head, and with all the weight of his antlers, as if he just could not understand, and then he trotted away to rejoin his scattered friends. A grim and dangerous experience this fight had been to Reddy, but he felt proud and strong and secure now that it was over. He walked around the glade with his tail held high, ready to fight again if need be, knowing that there was nothing in the mountains that he and the king need fear, nothing except man, and about the danger for man he was not quite sure. Had the king started north that night on one of his long tours, Reddy, in his exultation and love for the wilds, might never have come under Johnny's influence. But the ties between the hound and the man, welded through so many generations, might have been completely broken, and Reddy might have become a wolf in spirit, as he was by training. The scales that hung in the balance that night. But the king turned south, back to the little Sheep Creek Valley, back to where Johnny's cabin overlooked the woods and the basin, where Reddy's own kin could lure him again to the softer ways of life. If the big wolf sensed at all any of this, he gave no sign. Head up and nose pointed straight ahead, he led at a steady pace through the forest, stopping only briefly at intervals to lick his wounded leg and to run his healing tongue over Reddy's cuts, where the blood still oozed and clotted the hair. And so these two friends, so different, yet so closely joined, came to the ridge that overlooked the little Sheep Creek, and a new chapter of life opened for both of them. End of chapter 6.